Welcome to Tales by Felix, where every story unlocks a new world. Remember to subscribe, like and share. Let's begin. The Vance household was a portrait of quiet elegance, a two-story colonial with ivy crawling up its brick facade, nestled in the sleepy suburb of Willow Creek. Inside, Eleanor Vance stood at the kitchen island, her hands dusted with flour as she kneaded dough for a rosemary focaccia. The late afternoon sun filtered through the lace curtains, casting delicate patterns on the hardwood floor. At 42, Eleanor was still striking, her auburn hair pulled into a loose bun, her hazel eyes sharp yet softened by years of contented routine. But tonight, as the clock ticked toward Arthur's usual arrival, a faint unease stirred within her. Arthur Vance, her husband of 15 years, was a man of predictable habits. He'd walk through the door at 6:15 p.m., his briefcase swinging, his tie slightly loosened, and flash that boyish grin that had once made Eleanor's heart skip. Lately, though, the grin was absent, replaced by distracted nods or murmurs about work. Their conversations, once vibrant with shared dreams and laughter, had dwindled to logistics, bills, groceries, the occasional mention of their grown daughter, Lily, now away at college. Eleanor brushed a strand of hair from her face, her fingers lingering on the gold band of her wedding ring. She glanced at the clock. 6:30 p.m. No Arthur. No text. She sighed, telling herself it was just another late meeting at his law firm. But the silence of the house felt heavier tonight, as if it were holding its breath. When Arthur finally arrived at 7:02, his footsteps were brisk, his voice clipped. "Sorry, Elle got held up with a client." He dropped his briefcase by the door and headed straight for the study, bypassing the kitchen where the scent of fresh bread lingered. Eleanor paused, her hands still in the dough. "Dinner's almost ready," she called softly, hoping to draw him back. "I made your favorite." "Great, thanks," came his muffled reply, already behind the study door. She stared at the closed door, a pang tightening her chest. This wasn't the man who'd once spun her around the kitchen to Ella Fitzgerald, laughing as they tripped over the rug. This was a stranger wearing Arthur's face, his warmth fading like a candle burned too long. She wiped her hands on her apron, her resolve hardening. Something was wrong, and she wouldn't ignore it any longer. The next evening, Eleanor sat curled on the living room sofa, a glass of Merlot in hand, pretending to read a novel. The house was quiet, save for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the old oak floors. Arthur had texted earlier, saying he'd be late again, another client dinner. She'd nodded at the message, her thumb hovering over the reply button before typing a simple, "Okay." But now, as the clock neared 9 p.m., she heard the front door click open. Her pulse quickened. She set the book down, her ears straining. Arthur's voice drifted from the foyer, low and hushed, not the usual cadence of a man greeting his home, but the guarded tone of someone hiding something. "Victoria, I told you I can't talk now," he whispered, his voice barely audible through the cracked door. "I'll call you tomorrow. Just be patient." Eleanor froze, the name Victoria slicing through her like a cold blade. Who was Victoria? A colleague? A client? Her mind raced, conjuring images of a faceless woman, her laughter mingling with Arthur's in some dimly lit restaurant. She pressed herself against the armrest, straining to hear more, but Arthur's footsteps moved toward the stairs, his phone call ended. "Elle," he called, his voice now bright, performative. "You still up?" She forced a smile, her heart hammering. "Right here," she said, lifting her book as if engrossed. "How was the client dinner?" "Fine. Boring, as usual." He loosened his tie, avoiding her gaze. "I'm beat. Heading to bed." As he climbed the stairs, Eleanor's eyes lingered on the empty foyer. Victoria. The name echoed in her mind, a splinter she couldn't dislodge. She sipped her wine, the taste bitter now, and made a decision. She wouldn't confront him, not yet. But she would watch. She would listen. And she would find out who Victoria was. Over the next week, Eleanor became a detective in her own life. She noticed the subtle shifts in Arthur's behavior, each one a thread in a tapestry of suspicion. His phone, once left carelessly on the counter, now never left his pocket. He'd started locking his study door, claiming he needed focus for work. And then there were the late nights, 3 in a row, each excused with a vague, "The firm's swamped." On Thursday, as Eleanor folded laundry in their bedroom, she caught a whiff of something unfamiliar on Arthur's dress shirt, a faint, floral perfume, not her own lavender and cedar scent. Her fingers trembled as she held the fabric to her nose, the fragrance confirming what her heart dreaded. It was a woman's perfume, delicate yet bold, the kind that lingered after an embrace. She sat on the edge of the bed, the shirt crumpled in her lap, her mind spiraling. Was this Victoria's scent? Was Arthur careless enough to let it cling to him, or was he so confident in her trust that he didn't bother to hide it? Anger flickered, but she tamped it down. Anger was loud, reckless. She needed to be calculated, invisible. That night, as Arthur showered, Eleanor slipped into his study. The desk was meticulous, as always, but a small receipt caught her eye, tucked beneath a stack of papers. A coffee shop in the city, dated 2 days ago, for 2 lattes and a scone. Arthur hated scones. Her stomach twisted. She pocketed the receipt, her hand steady despite the storm inside her. Later, as they ate dinner in near silence, Eleanor studied him. His jaw was tight, his eyes darting to his phone every few minutes. "Everything okay at work?" she asked, her voice light, probing. He nodded, too quickly. "Just the usual chaos. Big case coming up." She smiled, her fork pausing midair. "Must be exhausting. You've been out so late." His gaze flickered, just for a moment. "Yeah, well, you know how it is. Duty calls." Eleanor nodded, her smile unwavering, but inside, her resolve crystallized. Duty, indeed. She would find out what, or who, was calling him. On Saturday, Eleanor met her best friend, Penelope, at their favorite cafe, a cozy spot with mismatched chairs and the aroma of fresh espresso. Penelope was a whirlwind of energy, blonde curls bouncing, her laugh loud enough to turn heads. They'd been friends since college, sharing secrets over late-night wine and supporting each other through life's highs and lows. But today, Eleanor's heart was heavy as she stirred her cappuccino, the foam swirling like her thoughts. "Pen, can I ask you something?" Eleanor said, her voice measured. Penelope's blue eyes sparkled. "Of course, hon. What's up?" Eleanor hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Arthur's been different. Late nights, distracted. I heard him on the phone with someone named Victoria. Do you know anyone by that name at his firm?" Penelope's smile faltered, just for a split second, before she recovered with a laugh. "Victoria? Nope, doesn't ring a bell. You know Arthur, probably just some client with a fancy name." "Why? You worried?" The deflection was subtle, but Eleanor caught it, the way Penelope's fingers tightened around her mug, the slight pitch in her voice. Her best friend was hiding something. "Maybe," Eleanor said, forcing a chuckle. "I'm probably overthinking it." "Oh, Elle, you're too hard on yourself," Penelope said, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. "Arthur's crazy about you. Always has been. Don't let your imagination run wild." The words were warm, but they felt hollow. Eleanor's gaze lingered on Penelope's hand, noting the new bracelet, a delicate gold chain with a small heart charm. It was unfamiliar, expensive. A gift, perhaps? Her mind flashed to Arthur's credit card statement, a recent charge at a jewelry store she dismissed as a work expense. As they parted ways, Penelope hugged her tightly, her perfume, a floral, heady scent, enveloping Eleanor. It was the same scent from Arthur's shirt. Eleanor's breath caught, but she kept her expression neutral. "Let's do this again soon," she said, her voice steady. "Absolutely," Penelope replied, oblivious to the storm brewing in Eleanor's heart. Driving home, Eleanor gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white. Penelope, her confidante, her sister in spirit, was Victoria. The betrayal cut deeper than she'd imagined, a double wound of husband and friend. But she wouldn't cry. Not yet. She needed proof, and she needed a plan. That night, Eleanor sat at her vanity, the house dark and silent. Arthur was at the office, his latest excuse. She opened a drawer, pulling out a leather-bound journal she'd bought years ago for a writing class she never finished. Its pages were blank, waiting for a story. Now, they would hold hers. She uncapped her pen, the nib hovering over the first page. Her hand shook, not with fear, but with purpose. She began to write. March 12, 2025. I don't know where to start, but I know I can't stay silent anymore. Not to myself. Arthur is slipping away, and I think Penelope is the reason. Her name is Victoria, or so he thinks he's hiding. I heard him whisper it, saw the guilt in his eyes. Today, her perfume confirmed it. I'm not ready to confront them. I need to be sure. This journal will be my witness, my strength. Every clue, every lie, I'll write it here until I know the truth. And when I do, I'll decide what comes next. She wrote for hours, detailing the receipt, the perfume, Penelope's bracelet, Arthur's late nights. Each word was a brick in a fortress she was building, a place to store her pain and sharpen her resolve. The journal became her silent confidant, absorbing her fears and anger without judgment. The next morning, Eleanor tucked the journal into a locked drawer, its weight a quiet promise. She moved through the day with deliberate calm, cooking breakfast, smiling at Arthur as he rushed out the door. But her eyes were sharper now, her senses attuned to every detail. She noticed the way he avoided her gaze, the way his phone buzzed incessantly, the way he mentioned Penelope's name in passing, testing her reaction. "Penelope's been asking about you," he said casually over coffee. "Said you two had fun at the cafe." Eleanor's heart thudded, but her voice was smooth. "We did. She's always so vibrant." Arthur nodded, oblivious to the double meaning in her words. "Yeah, she's something." As he left for work, Eleanor retrieved her journal, adding a new entry. "He mentions her so easily, as if I don't see the truth. But I do. And I'm watching." She closed the journal, her fingers tracing its cover. This was no longer just a record of betrayal. It was her weapon, her map to justice. She would be patient, meticulous, and when the time came, unstoppable. Eleanor Vance had become a ghost in her own life, moving silently through the routines of her marriage while her eyes missed nothing. The kitchen, once a sanctuary of shared meals and laughter, now felt like a stage where she played the role of the unsuspecting wife. Each morning, she brewed Arthur's coffee, smiled as he kissed her cheek, and watched him leave, his briefcase swinging with a confidence that mocked her growing suspicions. But Eleanor was no longer the woman who trusted blindly. Her journal, tucked away in its locked drawer, was filling with observations, each one a shard of glass in the mosaic of Arthur's deception. It was a crisp April morning when Eleanor began to notice the patterns. At a neighborhood barbecue, hosted by their mutual friends, the Hendersons, she watched Arthur and Penelope with the precision of a hawk. The backyard was alive with chatter, the clink of glasses, and the sizzle of burgers on the grill, but Eleanor's focus was singular. Arthur stood near the patio, a beer in hand, laughing with a group of neighbors. Penelope was there too, her blonde curls catching the sunlight, her laughter a touch too bright. Eleanor sipped her iced tea, her gaze flickering between them. She noticed the way Arthur's eyes sought Penelope's when he thought no one was watching, a glance too long, too intimate. She saw Penelope brush past him to grab a plate, her hand grazing his arm in a way that lingered beyond casual. And then there was the moment when they stepped away from the crowd, ostensibly to refill their drinks, their heads bent close in a hushed exchange. Eleanor's pulse quickened, but she kept her smile fixed, chatting with Mrs. Henderson about hydrangeas while her mind catalogued every detail. That night, she wrote in her journal, April 7, 2025. "They think they're invisible, but I see them. The way he looks at her, like she's the only one in the room. The way she touches him, bold yet sneaky. They're not just friends. I know it now, and I'll prove it." The next day, Eleanor followed Arthur to his law firm's annual charity gala, an event she'd always attended as his +1. This time, she arrived late, slipping into the crowded ballroom unnoticed, her black dress blending into the sea of suits and gowns. She spotted Arthur near the bar, his hand resting briefly on Penelope's lower back as he introduced her to a colleague. Penelope's laugh rang out, her eyes sparkling as she leaned into him. Eleanor's grip tightened on her clutch, but she stayed in the shadows, watching, waiting. The patterns were undeniable now, a choreography of betrayal she could no longer ignore. Eleanor had never been tech-savvy, but betrayal was a powerful teacher. Alone in the house one rainy afternoon, with Arthur working late, she sat at the kitchen table with his old laptop, one he'd left behind after upgrading. Her hands trembled as she powered it on, the screen casting a pale glow across her face. She wasn't sure what she was looking for, but she knew Arthur was careless with passwords, often reusing the same ones. She typed in Lily 2005, their daughter's name and birth year, and the laptop unlocked. Her breath caught as she opened his email, scrolling through a sea of work-related messages. Then she saw it, a thread with Penelope, buried in a folder labeled Miscellaneous. The subject lines were innocuous: lunch plans, quick check-in. But the content was anything but. Meet me at the apartment tonight, one email read, sent 2 weeks ago. Can't stop thinking about you, another said, with a winking emoji that made Eleanor's stomach churn. There were no explicit declarations, but the tone was intimate, conspiratorial, laced with a familiarity that stung. She dug deeper, finding a shared calendar invite for a client meeting at a downtown hotel, scheduled for the previous month. A quick search revealed the hotel's website, its sleek photos boasting luxurious suites. Eleanor's mind raced, picturing Arthur and Penelope in one of those rooms, their laughter echoing off the walls. She copied the emails to a USB drive, her movements methodical despite the rage simmering beneath her calm exterior. Later, she checked Arthur's social media, a platform he rarely used publicly but was active on in private messages. There, in a chat with Penelope, she found a photo, a selfie of them at a rooftop bar, their faces close, her smile radiant, his hand resting on her shoulder. The caption read, "Best date night yet." Eleanor's vision blurred with tears, but she blinked them away, saving the photo to her drive. This was no longer suspicion. This was proof. She wrote in her journal, April 10, 2025. The laptop was a goldmine. Emails, photos, lies. They're not just sneaking around, they're building a life together. I feel like a fool, but I won't stay one. This is just the beginning. The discovery of the apartment came by accident, or perhaps fate. Eleanor was sorting through a pile of mail on Arthur's desk, looking for a utility bill, when she found a folded lease agreement tucked inside a manila envelope. Her heart pounded as she unfolded it, her eyes scanning the details. A one-bedroom apartment in the city, leased under Arthur's name, starting 3 months ago. The address was unfamiliar, a trendy loft district far from their suburban home. The rent was exorbitant, more than their mortgage. Why would Arthur need a second home? She drove to the address the next day, her hand steady on the wheel despite the storm in her chest. The building was sleek, modern, with floor-to-ceiling windows and a doorman who nodded as she approached. She didn't enter, just stood across the street, watching. Around 6 p.m., she saw them, Arthur and Penelope, stepping out of a cab together. He carried a bottle of wine, she held a takeout bag. They laughed, their ease with each other a knife to Eleanor's heart. They disappeared into the building, and she knew they weren't there for a quick visit. That night, she wrote, April 15, 2025. The apartment is real. I saw them, so comfortable, like they belong there. It's their secret world, and I'm the outsider. But not for long. I'll use this, every piece of it. She called Edward, Arthur's younger brother, later that evening. Edward was the family's quiet anchor, a high school teacher with a kind heart and a loyalty to Eleanor that had always felt genuine. "Can we meet?" she asked, her voice steady. "I need to talk." They met at a diner the next morning, its neon sign buzzing in the gray dawn. Edward's brow furrowed as she recounted the lease, the emails, the photo. Are you sure?" he asked, his coffee untouched. "This doesn't sound like Arthur." "I saw them, Edward," she said, her voice low but firm. "At the apartment. Together." He ran a hand through his hair, his face pale. "God, I don't know what to say. If this is true, I'm with you. Whatever you need." She nodded, grateful for his support. "Just keep this between us. I'm not ready to confront him yet. I need more." Edward leaned forward, his voice earnest. "You don't have to do this alone. I'll help you dig, discreetly. Arthur's my brother, but your family too." Edward proved true to his word. Over the next week, he became Eleanor's quiet ally, using his access to Arthur's world to uncover more. He called her one evening, his voice tense. "I found something," he said. "Arthur asked me to pick up some documents from his office last month. There was a bank statement in his drawer, joint account, his name and Penelope's. Small transactions, but they're there. Coffee shops, restaurants, even a jewelry store." Eleanor's breath hitched. "The bracelet. Can you get me a copy?" she asked. "I'll try," he said. But, this is tearing me up. I want to believe there's an explanation, but there isn't, she said softly. Thank you, Edward. You don't know what this means. She added to her journal, April 20th, 2025. Edward's on my side, and it changes everything. The joint account is another nail in their coffin. I'm building a case, piece by piece. They won't see me coming. Edward's help wasn't just practical, it was emotional. Over coffee the next day, he shared stories of Arthur's past, moments of selfishness Eleanor had overlooked in the haze of love. He's always been good at hiding things, Edward admitted, stirring his coffee. Even as kids, he'd charm his way out of trouble. But this is different. Eleanor nodded, her eyes distant. I thought I knew him. I thought I knew Penelope. But I was wrong about both. You're stronger than you know, Edward said, his voice firm. You'll get through this. She smiled faintly, the weight of his words settling in her chest. She wasn't alone anymore, and that gave her courage to keep going. Eleanor knew the confrontation with Penelope was inevitable, but she chose her moment carefully. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon, the air heavy with the promise of spring rain. She invited Penelope over for tea, claiming she needed advice on redecorating the living room. Penelope arrived, all smiles, her blonde curls bouncing as she hugged Eleanor tightly. That same floral perfume enveloped her, a cruel reminder of the truth. They sat in the living room, cups of chamomile steaming between them. Eleanor's journal was hidden upstairs, but its weight felt present, urging her forward. Pen, she began, her voice calm, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Penelope's smile wavered. Of course, Elle. What's wrong? Eleanor looked into her friend's eyes, searching for the woman she'd trusted for decades. Are you Victoria? The silence was deafening. Penelope's face drained of color, her hands tightening around her cup. What are you talking about? She stammered. I heard Arthur on the phone, Eleanor said, her tone even, almost gentle. He said, Victoria. And then I saw you too, at the apartment. I know, Pen. Penelope's eyes filled with tears, but they weren't tears of remorse, they were tears of panic. Elle, it's not what you think, she said, her voice shaking. We're friends. You're misreading things. Eleanor leaned forward, her gaze unyielding. Don't lie to me. I've seen the emails, the photos, the lease. I smelled your perfume on his shirt. You're not my friend, Penelope. You're his. Penelope's sob broke the silence, her facade crumbling. I didn't mean for it to happen, she whispered. It just did. Eleanor felt the world tilt, but she held herself steady. Get out, she said quietly. And don't come back. Penelope left, her footsteps echoing in the empty foyer. Eleanor sat motionless, her tea untouched, her heart a battlefield of grief and resolve. She opened her journal that night, her pen steady, April 25th, 2025. She admitted it, in her own weak way. The truth is out, but I'm not done. This isn't about tears anymore, it's about justice. Eleanor Vance had become a master of masks. Each morning, she greeted Arthur with a smile as warm as the coffee she poured, her voice steady as she asked about his day. The kitchen, with its sunlit counters and the faint scent of rosemary from last night's dinner, was her stage, and she played her part flawlessly. Arthur, oblivious, kissed her forehead before leaving for work, his briefcase swinging as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Eleanor's heart was a fortress, her journal its vault, and every moment of her calm demeanor was a calculated act. She moved through their suburban home with purpose, her hazel eyes sharp, missing nothing. Arthur's carelessness had grown. His phone left on the counter for brief moments, his study door occasionally ajar. She seized these opportunities, photographing his calendar, noting meetings marked V in his precise handwriting. Each piece of evidence was a thread in the tapestry she was weaving, one that would unravel his secret life. One evening, as Arthur showered, Eleanor slipped into his study, her pulse steady despite the risk. She found a hotel confirmation in his email, a weekend getaway booked for the following month, 2 guests, under his name and Victoria. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, her breath shallow. She forwarded the email to herself, deleting the trace, then returned to the living room, her novel open as if she'd never moved. At dinner, Arthur was chatty, a rare occurrence. "Big case wrapping up soon," he said, cutting into his steak. "Might take a weekend to decompress. Maybe we should plan something, Elle." Her smile was effortless, a blade wrapped in silk. "That sounds lovely," she said, her voice light. "Where were you thinking?" He shrugged, his eyes flickering to his phone. "Somewhere quiet. Maybe the coast." She nodded, sipping her wine, her mind racing. The coast. The hotel was in a seaside town, a romantic escape she now knew wasn't meant for her. "Let me know when you decide," she said, her tone so convincing even she almost believed it. In her journal that night, she wrote, May 1st, 2025. "He thinks I'm blind, but I'm the one watching. The hotel, the lies, the arrogance of it all. I'm not his wife anymore. I'm his mirror, reflecting his deceit back at him. Soon, he'll see." Eleanor knew knowledge was power, but power needed structure. She couldn't confront Arthur with just her journal and a broken heart. She needed a plan, one fortified by law and logic. On a rainy Tuesday, she drove to the city, her windshield wipers a metronome to her thoughts. Her destination was a small law office, recommended by a colleague who'd navigated her own divorce. Eleanor had chosen it for its discretion, far from Willow Creek's prying eyes. The lawyer, Margaret Klein, was a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s, her office lined with books and framed degrees. Eleanor sat across from her, the journal in her lap, its weight grounding her. "I need to understand my options," she said, her voice steady. "My husband is having an affair, and I have evidence." Margaret leaned forward, her pen poised. "Tell me everything." Eleanor recounted the story, the overheard call, the perfume, the emails, the apartment lease, Penelope's tearful admission. She slid a folder across the desk, containing printed emails, the lease agreement, and photos from her USB drive. Margaret's brow furrowed as she reviewed them, her expression a mix of admiration and resolve. "You've been thorough," Margaret said, her tone approving. "This evidence strengthens your position. New York is a no-fault divorce state, but infidelity and financial misconduct can influence asset division and alimony. Have you thought about what you want?" Eleanor's fingers tightened around her journal. "I want what's fair. The house, my share of our savings, and my dignity. He's been hiding assets, I think. I need to protect myself." Margaret nodded. "We'll start by freezing any joint accounts and requesting a forensic audit. If he's funneling money to this other woman, we'll find it. In the meantime, keep gathering evidence, but don't confront him yet. Timing is everything." Eleanor left the office with a plan, her steps lighter despite the rain. That night, she wrote, May 5th, 2025. "Margaret is my shield, my guide. I'm not just fighting for me, I'm fighting for the life I built, the trust one gave. Arthur will learn what it costs to betray me." Eleanor's alliance with Edward grew stronger, a quiet partnership forged in shared betrayal. Arthur's brother had become her confidant, his loyalty to her outweighing his ties to blood. One evening, Edward arrived at the house while Arthur was at a client dinner. He carried a manila envelope, his face grim. "I got the bank statements," he said, handing her the envelope. "It wasn't easy," Arthur's assistant was nosy, "but I managed." Eleanor opened the envelope, her eyes scanning the pages. The joint account with Penelope was there, as Edward had said, but the transactions were more damning than she'd expected. Regular deposits to a property management company, likely for the apartment. A $2,000 charge at a jewelry store, matching the date of Penelope's new bracelet. And then, a transfer to an offshore account, small but suspicious, labeled consulting fees. "This is a lot," Eleanor said, her voice low. "He's hiding money." Edward nodded, his jaw tight. "He's always been clever with numbers. I checked with a friend at the bank. Offshore accounts are tricky to trace, but not impossible. I can get you more if you need it." She touched his arm, grateful. "You've done enough, Edward. More than enough." They sat at the kitchen table, the statement spread before them like a crime scene. Edward's voice was soft, pained. "I keep thinking there's a mistake, you know? That he's not this person. But then I see this, and I'm sorry, Elle." "Don't be," she said, her eyes fixed on the papers. "He made his choices. Now I'm making mine." She added to her journal, May 10th, 2025. The money trail is clear. He's not just cheating, he's stealing from our life, our future. Edward's help is my lifeline, but this is my battle. I'm ready for the next step. Eleanor's days were a balancing act, maintaining her facade at home while building her strength within. She joined a local book club, not for the novels but for the community, the women who shared their stories over wine and cheese. One, a divorcee named Clara, became a confidant. Over coffee one afternoon, Clara listened as Eleanor poured out her pain, her voice steady but raw. "I thought I knew him," Eleanor said, stirring her latte. 15 years, and he's living a double life. And Penelope, she was my best friend. Clara's eyes were kind but fierce. "You're not the first to be blindsided, and you won't be the last. But you're doing something about it. That's what matters. You're not a victim, Eleanor, you're a survivor." The words sank into her, fortifying her resolve. She leaned on Edward too, their weekly coffee meetings a ritual of support. One morning, as they sat in the same diner, Edward's face was heavy with guilt. "I keep thinking I should have seen it," he said. "Arthur's always been charming, but I didn't think he'd go this far." Eleanor reached across the table, squeezing his hand. "You couldn't have known. But you're here now, and that's enough." He smiled faintly. "You're stronger than he ever deserved, Elle." She wrote in her journal, May 15th, 2025. "Clara and Edward are my anchors. They remind me who I am, not who he tried to make me. I'm not just surviving, I'm rebuilding. The confrontation is coming, and I'll be ready." The journal was nearly full, its pages a testament to Eleanor's transformation. She sat at her vanity, the house silent except for the distant hum of the dishwasher. Arthur was asleep upstairs, unaware of the storm gathering in her heart. She opened the journal, her pen steady as she wrote her final entry. May 20th, 2025. This is the end of this chapter, but not the story. I have everything I need, emails, photos, bank statements, the lease, Penelope's confession. I've built my case, brick by brick, and now it's time to act. Tomorrow I'll call Arthur, not to scream or cry, but to show him the truth he thought he'd hidden. This journal has been my voice, my strength, my witness. It's carried me through the pain, and now it will carry me to justice. He broke my heart, but I'm reclaiming my life. She closed the journal, her fingers tracing its worn cover. It was more than a book now, it was her shield, her sword, her story. She locked it away, her resolve unshakable. Tomorrow she would face Arthur, not as his wife, but as the woman who'd outsmarted his lies. She stood, glancing at herself in the mirror. The woman staring back was no longer the trusting wife who'd kneaded dough in a sunlit kitchen. She was Eleanor Vance, the quiet strategist, ready to reclaim her power. The morning sun spilled through the kitchen windows, painting the countertops in gold, but Eleanor Vance felt no warmth. She sat at the table, her journal open before her, its pages a map of her pain and power. Today was the day. Arthur was upstairs, getting ready for work, unaware that the ground beneath him was about to shift. Eleanor's hands were steady as she sipped her coffee, her hazel eyes fixed on the journal's final entry. She'd rehearsed this moment in her mind 100 times, but now, with the hour approaching, her resolve was iron. She dialed Arthur's number from her phone, knowing he'd answer despite his morning rush. "Elle." His voice came through, casual, distracted. "What's up?" "I'm heading out soon." "I need you to come downstairs," she said, her tone calm, almost gentle. "We need to talk." A pause, then a chuckle. "Can it wait?" "I've got a meeting." "No," she said, her voice unwavering. "It can't." He appeared moments later, his tie half knotted, his brow furrowed with mild annoyance. "What's this about?" he asked, leaning against the counter. Eleanor stood, sliding the journal toward him. Beside it was a folder, thick with printed emails, bank statements, the lease agreement, and photos. "I know about Victoria," she said, her voice steady as a blade. "I know about Penelope. I know about the apartment, the hotel, the money you've been hiding. I know everything, Arthur." His face drained of color, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. "Elle, you've got it all wrong," he stammered, his hands raised defensively. "It's not what you think." She opened the folder, spreading its contents across the table, each document a silent accusation. "Don't lie to me," she said, her eyes locking onto his. "I've seen the emails, the photos. I smelled her perfume on your shirt. I stood across from your apartment and watched you walk in with her, laughing like I didn't exist. You're done, Arthur." He sank into a chair, his bravado crumbling. "Ella, I didn't mean to hurt you. It just happened." Her laugh was sharp, cutting. "It didn't just happen. You chose this. Every lie, every secret, was a choice. And now you'll face the consequences." She turned away, leaving him with the folder, her voice echoing in the silence. "My lawyer will be in touch." That night, she wrote, May 21st, 2025. "I faced him, and he broke. Not with tears, but with excuses. My voice was my weapon, and it was enough. The truth is out, and I'm free." Eleanor packed a single suitcase, her movements deliberate. She took only what mattered, her clothes, a few books, her journal. The wedding photos on the dresser, the trinkets from their travels, she left behind. They were relics of a life that no longer existed. The house, once a haven, now felt like a mausoleum, its walls heavy with memories of betrayal. Arthur was gone when she returned from a walk, his car missing from the driveway. A note on the counter read, "I need time to think. I'm sorry, Elle." She crumpled it, her lips a tight line. Sorry wasn't enough. It never would be. She called Edward, her voice steady. "I'm leaving today," she said. "Can I stay with you for a bit?" "Of course," he replied, his tone warm with concern. "You're welcome as long as you need." By noon, Eleanor stood at the front door, her suitcase at her side. She looked back at the house one last time, the ivy-covered bricks, the windows glowing with afternoon light. It was beautiful, but it wasn't hers anymore. She closed the door, the click final, and drove to Edward's apartment in the city. That evening, as she unpacked in his guest room, Edward knocked softly. "You okay?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe. She nodded, managing a small smile. "I will be. Thank you for this." He hesitated, then said, "You're stronger than anyone I know. L. Arthur's a fool." She wrote in her journal, May 22nd, 2025. "I left today, not in defeat, but in victory. The house is his now, but my life is mine. I'm starting over, and it feels like breathing again." The fallout was swift and merciless. Arthur and Penelope's secret unraveled like a poorly stitched seam, exposed to the harsh light of Willow Creek's tight-knit community. Eleanor hadn't spread the word herself, her evidence had done that for her. A copy of the folder, sent anonymously to Arthur's law firm, triggered whispers that grew into a roar. His colleagues, once charmed by his charisma, now eyed him with disdain. A senior partner called him in for a discussion about ethics, and rumors of his demotion spread. Penelope fared no better. Her social media, once a curated gallery of smiles, was flooded with questions from mutual friends. "Is it true?" one posted. "You and Arthur?" Her silence was answer enough. Invitations to book clubs and brunches dried up, her laughter no longer welcome in Willow Creek's cozy circles. Eleanor heard the gossip through Clara, who called one evening, her voice gleeful. "The whole town's talking," she said. "Arthur's been dodging questions at the country club, and Penelope's practically a ghost. You didn't just catch them, Elle, you burned their world down." Eleanor smiled faintly, stirring her tea. "I didn't do it for revenge," she said. "I did it for me." Clara laughed. "Sure, but it's a hell of a bonus." In her journal, Eleanor wrote, June 1st, 2025. "Their lives are unraveling, and I feel no guilt. They built this house of lies, and I just opened the door. The truth is a powerful thing." 6 months later, Eleanor stood at a podium in a community center, her hand steady as she faced a room of women. The seminar, Reclaiming Your Story, was Clara's idea, a platform for survivors of betrayal to share their journeys. Eleanor had hesitated, but her journal, now a symbol of her strength, urged her forward. She spoke clearly, her voice carrying a quiet power. "I was a wife who trusted, a friend who believed," she began. "But when I found out my husband and my best friend were betraying me, I didn't scream or cry. I wrote. I watched. I planned. My journal became my voice, and it helped me take back my life. The audience listened, rapt, as she shared her story. Not the salacious details, but the strength she found in silence, the power of evidence over emotion. She held up her journal, its leather cover worn but proud. "This was my weapon," she said. "Not to destroy, but to rebuild." A woman in the front row, her eyes wet, asked, "How did you keep going? How did you not break?" Eleanor smiled, her heart full. "I did break, at first. But then I realized breaking isn't the end. It's the beginning. You pick up the pieces and build something stronger." The applause was warm, healing. Later, as women approached her with their own stories, Eleanor felt a shift. She wasn't just Eleanor Vance, betrayed wife. She was Eleanor, the woman who'd turned pain into power. She wrote, November 15th, 2025. "Today, I shared my story, and it wasn't about him or her, it was about me. I'm not defined by their betrayal. I'm defined by my strength." A year after leaving, Eleanor stood in her new apartment, a cozy loft overlooking the city. The walls were adorned with art she'd chosen, the shelves lined with books she loved. Her life was her own now, rebuilt from the ashes of betrayal. She'd finalized the divorce, securing the house and a fair share of their assets, thanks to Margaret's legal prowess. The offshore account had been traced, Arthur's financial deceit laid bare in court. Arthur and Penelope were shadows of their former selves. He'd left the firm, taking a lower-paying job in another city. Penelope had moved away, her social circle shattered. Eleanor didn't gloat, she didn't need to. Their consequences were their own. She sat at her desk, her journal open to a blank page. She wrote, May 20th, 2026. "Silence was my strength, not my weakness. I didn't need to scream to be heard. I didn't need to fight to win. My journal was my voice, my truth, and it carried me here, to a life that's mine, whole and free." She closed the journal, placing it on a shelf beside her new writings, articles, essays, a book outline about resilience. Outside, the city hummed, alive with possibility. Eleanor smiled, her heart light. She had won, not by destroying them, but by rebuilding herself. And that was the sweetest revenge of all. The end.